supposed to make a public announcement today. Now, according to Le Figaro, the right-wing newspaper, this is the biggest crisis for the company, and its very survival is at stake. So here you see it. Peugeot has launched a battle for its survival. Le Figaro says that closing the site is going to have an effect similar to a bomb. It's the first time that such a big car plant has closed in the last 20 years. And inside, Le Figaro takes a closer look at just what the problem is. And according to Le Figaro, the car giant is in hot water financially. So on top of closing this plant, according to Le Figaro and lots of other papers today, the car giant could try to cut just as many as 10,000 jobs across France. According to France, they're not Le Figaro, they're not facing a bankruptcy just quite yet, but they could very well ask for a bailout. Now, Libération, the left-leaning newspaper, has an interesting report at Aulnay itself. It takes a look at the history of the site and also interviews a lot of workers that you see there in photos who have been working there for a long time. A lot of the workers say that they point out that the management is somewhat old school, maybe archaic, and maybe that could explain just why the company has been struggling. Now, La Croix also has a very pessimistic front page regarding the closure of the site, and it wonders, does the French automobile industry actually have a future? Now, La Croix does point out that the government is trying to set up measures to prop up the sector.
All right, we're going to move on now to left-leaning Libération. It's focusing on something completely different, and that's the unrest in Mali.
That's right. Libération wonders, is intervention necessary in Mali? It points out that Bamako has lost control of the north since a coup d'etat in March, and since then it seems like various groups of hardline Islamists have taken power, and all this has sparked concern within the international community that's wondering just what is the right response to have. Now, in their editorial, Libération points out that the Islamists have upset the very fragile balance in the whole Sahel region, and it points out that initially observers said that this whole situation was a direct consequence of the intervention in Libya, and this could justify another intervention under the umbrella of the United Nations to try to reestablish order, to maybe try to fix the mess that that intervention created. But the editorial points out that things are complicated, especially for a former colony such as France. And according to Libération, it's up to African states to lead the way for any military intervention. But it's interesting to note that there's another completely different opinion in L'Humanité, the communist newspaper, which says that any military intervention would be a complete catastrophe. They have an interview with Jean-Louis Trio, who's a historian, and he specialized in Islam and in sub-Saharan Africa. And he says that any kind of military intervention in Mali would be an open wound in West Africa, and it would get bogged down. He also points out that African soldiers from different countries aren't necessarily trained for desert warfare, especially facing an enemy that knows the terrain very well.
All right, we're going to move on now to French politics, and we haven't heard much lately from François Hollande's partner, Valérie.
She's been quite discreet since a Twitter scandal. Now, just to remind you, during the legislative elections last month, she caused quite an outrage because she openly supported a rogue socialist candidate in the town of La Rochelle. Now, that candidate happened to be running against François Hollande's former partner, Ségolène Royal, who was the official candidate for the Socialist Party, and she ended up losing. So Valérie Trierweiler drew a lot of criticism, including from the left. Since then, she's been keeping quite a low profile. She hasn't been accompanying François Hollande on his official visits. For instance, she wasn't at the official tea with Queen Elizabeth in London. Now, François Hollande's son, Thomas, his eldest son, has broken his silence, and he's brought the scandal back to life in an article that came out in Le Point, a magazine here in France, yesterday. He launched a scathing attack at Trierweiler and said that accused her of destroying his father's Mr. Normal image that he's been trying to build up so much, and accused her of being out of line. Now, since then, he said that he was misquoted, but it's interesting to note that regardless of what happens, he and his 3 siblings have reportedly told their father that they never want to see Trierweiler again. So you can imagine that family dinners must be a little awkward these days.
That's what I read, that they just won't speak to her anymore, and they find it pretty unforgivable what she did, so we'll have to see what happens there. All right, thank you very much, Florence, for running us through the French newspapers. You're watching Live from Paris. We're going to go